Saturday, September the 11th, 1982, Nitzavim Vayelech. We will need chumashim. I wonder if the ushers could help me to make sure that everybody has a chumash. On the subject of retirement, as one gets older, one's memory gets a little fragile. So I forgot to welcome visitors to the SAJ and to tell them that we offer a complete program of religious services, and in addition we sponsor a Hebrew school, Hebrew high school, adult education programs, and various special interest committees. Our host today is Jack Levithan. Would he please stand? It's almost unnecessary, actually. You're visible in the sitting position. Jack will be very happy to answer questions you may have about the services, and we welcome all of you to the Kiddush jointly sponsored by Edna Goldwater in honor of her retirement and renewal of life, and Fanny Bloom on the occasion of Leonard Bloom's marriage tomorrow to Judy Ehrlich. My wife always consoles me. She says to him, "Darling, as you get older, you have fewer marbles, but you make prettier patterns." And there is a phrase in the liturgy somewhere which says, "May the old year end with its curses, and may the new year begin with its blessings." That's a highly appropriate comment both for a retirement and a marriage. Now, I ask you to turn in the Chumashim first to the Sidra this morning. We have a joint Sidra this morning as we approach Rosh Hashanah. Page 878. The opening verses of the Sidra in the 29th chapter of the book of Deuteronomy. Ye are standing this day, all of you, page 878. Ye are standing this day, all of you, before the Lord your God, your heads, your tribes, your elders, your officers, even all of the men of Israel. The little ones, your wives, the stranger that is in the midst of thy camp, from the hewer of thy wood unto the drawer of thy water, that thou shouldest enter into the covenant of the Lord thy God, and into his oath, which the Lord thy God maketh with thee this day, that he may establish thee this day unto himself for a people, that he may be unto thee as a God, as he spoke unto thee, and as he swore to thy fathers, to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob. Neither with you only do I make this covenant and this oath, but with him that standeth here with us this day before the Lord our God, and also with him that is not here with us this day. That verse surely is the very essence of what we do here in synagogue. That is to say, the covenant and the oath which the Jewish people has with God, with itself, and with its past, and with its future, is not limited simply to the here and now. The individual human life, the 80 years and 10, the proverbial 80 years and 10, that span of life is insufficient for any kind of meaning and purpose to be elicited from life. It is only when generation is added to generation, when we have the sense of the historical panorama, which in the case of Jewish tradition stretches back thousands of years, that we can begin to understand, to feel, to sense the meaning and purpose of human life. That meaning and purpose cannot be found in the isolated life of the individual. It can only be found in the ongoing process of Jewish history. And these words, which we are reminded today by the Torah, that this covenant is not only made with the living, but with the dead and the unborn, is of perhaps more crucial importance than ever before in the life of the Jewish people. I ask you now to turn to page 281. We're going to read 2 chapters of our sacred literature from the book of Judges, which were written hundreds of years ago, and yet which have a timely relevance to our present condition today. I'm going to read the 4th and 5th chapter of Judges in the English completely, because we never do this in synagogue, and we can't do this over the high holy days, but it is important, first of all, to read this text from the book of Judges, and then to ask ourselves what kind of a book the book of Judges is in the life of our people. I'd be hard put to give a date to these 2 chapters. I don't think anybody knows the dates. We know approximately that the period of the Judges about which these 2 chapters deal, comes shortly after the entrance by our ancestors into Canaan. And depending what date you choose for the exodus from Egypt, you have anything ranging from the 13th pre-Christian century to the 12th pre-Christian century for the episodes described in these chapters. That is to say, the period of the Judges was somewhere around the 13th or 12th pre-Christian centuries. The next question, of course, is when were these events recorded? That is a more complicated problem. But we can hazard a guess on best available information that the recording began sometime in the 9th pre-Christian century. And the actual redacting or the putting down of the sacred text seems to have been accomplished between the 6th, 5th, and 4th pre-Christian centuries in the process of the canonization of the Bible, which was not completed until the beginning of the Common Era. Whether there was such a woman as Deborah, whether the events that are described in these chapters actually happened, as the German historians love to say, is this wie es eigentlich gewesen? Could we see it if we were there today, or could a television camera hypothetically have recorded these events? That is almost a meaningless question. What we read in our sacred texts is myth. It is history that has been refashioned and rewritten to serve the needs of our ancestors. There are, of course, elements which can be established: the geography, the climate, the hills, the rivers. These are facts. But the way in which the events, even the wars, and the peoples that lived at that time, but the way in which these experiences were recorded and constantly rewritten and reinterpreted is part of the ongoing process of Jewish history, which does not come under the category of history in the conventional sense with lowercase h, or fact in the normal conventional sense of that word. We are in the presence of what the German critical scholars prefer to call Heilsgeschichte. We are in the presence of salvation history, which is a rather long-winded way of saying that our ancestors, for a variety of reasons, were extremely interested in the question, what is the meaning and purpose of human life in general, and what is the meaning and purpose of Jewish life in particular? And those 2 questions guided the manner in which they recorded these events. The Bible is not a history book, Immanuel Velikovsky notwithstanding. Where is Warren Schnorr, our resident supporter of Immanuel Velikovsky? Now Deborah, we are on page 281. Now Deborah, a prophetess, the wife of Lapidoth, she judged Israel at that time. I'll stop occasionally to make a comment, of course. That in itself, of course, is remarkable that we had a woman, Golda Meir, all this long time ago. We have some very important women in Jewish history, in biblical history. Miriam, for example. But this one, Miriam, was a kind of a satellite of Moses. Deborah was a judge in her own right. Now Deborah, a prophetess, the wife of Lapidoth, she judged Israel at that time, and she sat under the palm tree of Deborah between Ramah and Bethel in the hill country of Ephraim, and the children of Israel came up to her for judgment. And she sent and called Barak, the son of Abinoam, out of Kedesh Naphtali, and said unto him, Hath not the Lord, the God of Israel, commanded, saying, Go and draw toward Mount Tabor, and take with thee 10,000 men of the children of Naphtali and of the children of Zebulun? And I will draw unto thee to the brook Kishon Sisera, the captain of Jabin's army, with his chariots and his multitude, and I will deliver him into thy hand. Let's pause for station identification. The Hebrews, the Israelites, have just entered Canaan. Canaan has 7 indigenous ethnic groups, according to Jewish tradition. I'm following the myth rather than the actual history. In a general sense, we know that Palestine was not empty. Canaan was not empty then, even as it was not empty in the 19th century, when Zionism was first conceived. The 7 nations, the Hittites, the Girgashites, the Amorites, the Perizzites, the Jebusites, the Hivites, have I missed one out? Whatever, it's very difficult to remember them all. Like the kings of Israel. They were in the land, but God had said to Israel, to Moses, and to Joshua, Go and wipe those people out, for this is the land which I have chosen to give you. Those who live in the land are so immoral, so depraved, so utterly sunk in sin, that they deserve to be obliterated. You will be performing a mitzvah by destroying them. Now clearly the situation here indicates that Israel had not conquered the land completely. And among those chieftains that still remained to be wiped out was Sisera, captain of Jabin's army. They were Canaanites. We are talking about people who were living in ancient Palestine. The Israelites had just crossed over the Jordan, and they were trying to clean the land completely of all its indigenous inhabitants. Verse 8, and Barak said to her, If thou wilt go with me, then I will go, but if thou wilt not go with me, I will not go. Brave man. And she said, I will surely go with thee. Notwithstanding the journey that thou takest shall not be for thy honor, for the Lord will give Sisera over into the hand of a woman. And Deborah arose and went with Barak to Kadesh. And Barak called Zebulun and Naphtali together to Kadesh, and they went up 10,000 men at his feet. And Deborah went up with him. Now Heber the Kenite had severed himself from the Kenites, even from the children of Chovav, the father-in-law of Moses. That is, of course, Jethro. And had pitched his tent as far as Elon Bet-Sa'ananim, which is by Kadesh. And they told Sisera that Barak the son of Abinoam was gone to Mount Tabor, and Sisera gathered together all his chariots, even 900 chariots of iron. It doesn't change. A tank by any other name would smell as sweet. 900 chariots of iron. What is the name for a tank in modern Hebrew? Forgive my ignorance. What is the name for a tank in modern Hebrew? I'll choose Rechev Barzel here, but it doesn't sound likely. Mesilat Barzel, of course, is the Hebrew and modern Hebrew name for a railway. Eliezer, where's my cantor? Yes.
They use Merkava, the name of the...
Well, Merkava is a kind of a patented name for a like Zenith for a television set, right?
Unfortunately, in Israel they call it a tank.
Yeah. They call it a tank. Rechev Barzel clearly is straight out of tradition, but obviously the impact of the English language has got over. Deborah said to Barak, Up, for this is the day in which the Lord hath delivered Sisera into thy hand. Is not the Lord gone out before thee? So Barak went down from Mount Tabor, and 10,000 men after him. And the Lord discomfited Sisera and all his chariots and all his hosts with the edge of the sword before Barak. Note again here that as with the story of Hanukkah, it is not the Israelites, it is not Barak, it is not even Deborah who bring victory. It is Yahweh, it is God, to whom the victory is attributed, even as in the days of the Maccabees, where we say in the traditional prayer, you delivered the many into the hands of the few, the impure into the hands of the pure. All glory to God, non nobis domini. And the Lord discomfited Sisera and all his chariots with the edge of the sword, and Sisera alighted from his chariot and fled away on his feet. The leader of the Canaanites fled on his feet. But Barak pursued after the chariots and after the host unto Charoshet Goyim, and all the host of Sisera fell by the edge of the sword. There was not a man left. However, Sisera fled away on his feet to the tent of Yael, the wife of Heber the Kenite. For there was peace between Yabin, king of Chazor, and the house of Heber the Canaanite. And Jael went out to meet Sisera, and said unto him, Turn in, my lord, turn in to me. Fear not. And he turned in unto her into the tent, and she covered him with a rug. And he said unto her, Give me, I pray thee, a little water to drink, for I am thirsty. And she opened a bottle of milk, and gave him drink, and covered him. It's a very powerful sentence. A woman is asked to give a fleeing warrior who is thirsty and blood-covered and weary and dust all over him, asks him for something, to ask for water. He doesn't want to be a nuisance. He doesn't ask for scotch or anything stronger. He just asks for anything. He's only too grateful to be alive. And the woman opens a bottle of milk and gives him milk and covers him. And he said unto her, Stand in the door of the tent, and it shall be, when any man doth come and inquire of thee, and say, Is there any man here? That thou shalt say no. Then Jael, Heber's wife, took a tent pin, and took a hammer in her hand, and went softly unto him, and smote the pin into his temples, and it pierced through into the ground, for he was in a deep sleep. So he swooned and died. And behold, as Barak pursued Sisera, Jael came out to meet him, and said unto him, Come, and I will show thee the man whom thou seekest. And he came unto her, and behold, Sisera lay dead, and the tent pin was in his temples. I believe there's a little hole here, and a little hole there. It's a bit like the fontanelle that the child has, which actually the fontanelle closes the hole in the forehead that the child has, so that the head can come out through the womb. It contracts when it comes out. Do we have a gynecologist in the congregation this morning? We don't have any Hebraeus here this morning. A Tchotchiklis, a doctor in the house? No? Am I right? The temples, there are holes here, right? So it's quite possible to do this. And he came unto her, and behold, Sisera lay dead, and the tent pin was in his temples. So God subdued on that day Jabin the king of Canaan before the children of Israel, and the hand of the children of Israel prevailed more and more against Jabin the king of Canaan, until they had destroyed Jabin king of Canaan. The implication is that the conquest of Canaan pursued unabated. Then sang Deborah and Barak the son of Abinoam on that day, saying, When men let grow their hair in Israel. This refers to the custom that when war broke out, men would take vows not to cut their hair until victory had been accomplished. Growing hair long was a sign of strength, a sign of virility. This, of course, is not a custom that only obtained among our ancestors. It is a widespread custom among ancient tribes, the long hair of the warrior. It also was a custom in the Nazirite to grow the hair long. When men let grow their hair in Israel, in other words, when people got ready for war, when the people offered themselves willingly, volunteered. Look at the word in Hebrew, behit nadev am. We have in Hebrew the word nadava, a free will offering, a gift offering. In Orthodox synagogues on Saturday morning, people give nadavot. We used to say in the Yiddish word schnodder, as if it was spelled S-H-N-O-D-D-E-R, which of course is from the Hebrew shen nadar, who has vowed to give a certain sum of money. Behit nadev am, mit nadev. When the people offered themselves willingly, bless ye the Lord. Hear, O ye kings. Give ear, O ye princes. I unto the Lord will sing. I will sing praise to the Lord, the God of Israel. Lord, when thou didst go forth out of Seir, when thou didst march out of the field of Edom, the earth trembled, the heavens also dropped, yea, the clouds dropped water. The mountains quaked at the presence of the Lord, even yon Sinai at the presence of the Lord, the God of Israel. In the days of Shamgar, the son of Anat, in the days of Jael, the highway ceased. There were terrorists in the land. People couldn't walk for fear of being attacked on the highway which must be secure, else all social intercourse fails. People were afraid in the days of Shamgar to walk on the highways because of the brigands, because of the robbers, because of the then PLO. And the travelers walked through byways. You had to be very careful to avoid the main roads. The rulers ceased in Israel. They ceased until that thou didst arise, Deborah, that thou didst arise, a mother in Israel. I don't know whether modern feminists would care. I don't know whether that woman Bendix, who married the Mary Cunningham, would like to be called a mother in Israel for being successful in sewing morale. But I mean, here it's very interesting. You see, the ancient feminists didn't mind being called mothers in Israel. Or maybe the poet called her a mother in Israel, and she wrote a letter to the New York Times the next week and complained bitterly. That thou didst rise, Em b'Yisrael, ad shakamti devora, shakamti em b'Yisrael. They chose new gods. Then was war in the gates. Was there a shield or spear seen among 40,000 in Israel? The impression seems to be given that Israel was unprepared, like Britain in 1938-39. My heart is toward the governors of Israel, that offered themselves willingly among the people. Bless ye the Lord, ye that ride on white asses, ye that sit on rich cloths, and ye that walk by the way. Tell of it, louder than the voice of archers by the watering troughs. There shall they rehearse the righteous acts of the Lord, even the righteous acts of his rulers in Israel. Then the people of the Lord went down to the gates. Awake, awake, Deborah, awake, awake, utter a song. Arise, Barak, and lead thy captivity captive, thou son of Abinoam. Then made he a remnant to have dominion over the nobles and the people. The Lord made me have dominion over the mighty. Out of Ephraim came they whose root is in Amalek. After thee, Benjamin, among thy peoples. Out of Machir came down governors, and out of Zebulun they that handle the marshal's staff. And the princes of Yissachar were with Deborah. As was Yissachar, so was Barak. Into the valley they rushed forth at his feet. Among the divisions of Reuben there were great resolves of heart. And now apparently some people were not inspired to join the army. Some people sat behind. There was an old tradition in Israel that those who had just got married, Lenny, you're all right for a few weeks. Those who had just got married, those who had just built a new house, those who had just built an orchard, those who had just entered into a new business enterprise were permitted to opt for conscientious objection. But the poet speaks to those who failed to answer the call to the colors. Why sattest thou among the sheepfolds to hear the pipings for the flocks? At the divisions of Reuben there were great searchings of heart. They did not join, as the note says below, the Reubenites did not join their brethren in their life and death struggle. Gilead abode beyond the Jordan, and Dan, why doth he sojourn by the ships? Asher dwelt at the shore of the sea, and abideth by its bays. Not everybody came in. Zebulun is a people that jeoparded their lives unto the death, and Naphtali upon the high places of the field. No, some of the tribes gave beyond the call of duty, and some did not come for whatever reason. The kings came, they fought. Then fought the kings of Canaan. In Ta'anach, by the waters of Megiddo, they took no gain of money. In the current issue of the Jewish Week, which I'm almost embarrassed to quote from, but why should the devil have all the good tunes? As the founder of the Salvation Army said when people accused him of using beer hall songs for some of their hymns. I don't like the Jewish Week for the very simple reason that I find it triumphalist, heavily ethnocentric, and propagandist. In other words, fundamentally dishonest. I don't really feel that outside of the correspondence columns, and even there, it's a kind of a pre-cooked, pre-digested kind of pap that's often served, that one really is in the presence of an honest attempt to wrestle with some of the crucial problems that are facing the Jewish people in general and Israel in particular these days. But here's a very interesting thing that Saul Teplitz, who is rabbi of Sons of Israel Woodmere, our son Michael is a psychologist in Kiryat Shmona and has made Aliyah. On June the 6th he was called up for reserve duty. As his unit was entering Lebanon to occupy frontline positions, the entire contingent was presented with a sheet of paper, an official document of the Israel Defense Forces. Its title read simply, Demut HaChayal HaYisraeli, the image of the Israeli soldier. Prior to going into battle, the Israeli troops, both young draftees and reservists, young and old, had to read this statement and abide by its rules. Rabbi Teplitz writes, it requires no commentary. It demonstrates for those harsh critics of Israel that against the backdrop of the ugliness of war, facing a cruel enemy, Israeli soldiers were issued marching orders unique among armies. They dared speak of ethical standards, moral behavior, the very fiber of Jewish tradition. Well, let's not get too excited. When you have a pamphlet like this, sometimes the relationship between what the pamphlet asks and what actually people do is a little bit like the rules for driving and how people in fact drive. Let's be honest with ourselves. These laws are prescriptive and not necessarily descriptive, but nevertheless, even if that is the case, I'm quite sure that the vast majority of Israeli soldiers behaved in this fashion. I certainly would not say 100%. And one of the points that is mentioned is when you come into contact with civilians, you are to help prevent any violent act, bribery, plundering, even that which may be caused by the civilian population itself. The eyes of the entire world are focused on our area these days. The document ends with a quotation from the 7th chapter of the book of Joshua. We don't have it in our text prayer books this morning, otherwise I'd turn to that right now. But that describes what happened when, during the conquest of Canaan, a man called Achan stole some clothes from a Canaanite tent, even though there was a law against any kind of booty. Now, I don't want to give our ancestors moral credibility far beyond what they were capable of. The fact of the matter is that among our ancestors, as among many primitive tribes, all that which belonged to the enemy was taboo. It had to be destroyed, it had to be burned. If any of it was kept, it would poison the spiritual fiber of the victors. And the reason why Achan was punished so viciously was because the theft took place in connection with a city which, according to God's command, had to be cherem. It had to be totally and absolutely destroyed. And by saving a part of that loot, God's commandment was not being fulfilled. We have to be very careful not to attribute a moral insight when there isn't one. On the other hand, even a primitive law, when it becomes the soil from which an ethical impulse can rise, is something we must not sneeze at. And I was enormously moved that Achan was quoted to modern Hebraic soldiers with a little bit of anachronistic reinterpretation, without giving the full reason why Achan was forbidden to use the booty. And yesterday I received a beautiful letter from my son Jonathan, I should say a Megillah, which really was so beautiful, and in it was a little pamphlet which is not for the Israeli soldiers, but which he sent to us. It was given to all Israelis this year. Everybody was given as many as they could by I presume by the propaganda ministry, to know how to answer questions that tourists from abroad would be asking about what was going on in Israel. And what was the name of the pamphlet? Da Mashet Tashiv. You know, how can anybody who has studied Jewish tradition, to whom the sacred texts of Jewish history are an open book, ever be angry with the Israelis, the government, even with Menachem Begin, when the propaganda ministry publishes a booklet, the title of which is Da Mashet Tashiv. Da Mashet Tashiv is a quotation from Pirkei Avot, which was written about 2,000 years ago. And the original text is, its full quotation is, Da Mashet Tashiv le'apikoros. In other words, when Judaism was a church and not a polity, the rabbis printed their little metaphorical handbooks and said to all their Pharisaic rabbinic colleagues, you must know certain things which Christians and heretics will ask you, and also which people like Elisha ben Abuya, who once were devout Jews and became heretics, Da Mashet Tashiv. All you have to do is to look at the front cover of that pamphlet and realize that whatever errors may or may not be perpetrated in the state of Israel today, on a very fundamental level, the state is part of the warp and woof of the fabric of Jewish existence. Etzem me'atzamai uvasar mibsari, flesh of my flesh and bone of my bone. And even when, as happened this week, thank God, some Jews, I don't say some Jews, some public spokesman for the Jewish people, finally had the courage to come out of the closet and take a stand against the arrogance of the Begin government in setting up settlements precisely at a time when the first possibility of some kind of discussion for peace. What is Israel afraid of militarily right at this moment? Everything has fallen in her way, in her feet. Everything has fallen. Nothing can be done against her militarily. Now, in 100 years' time, the story may be completely different. But now, at a moment of supreme strength, if only Menachem Begin had a little bit of the blood of Winston Churchill and Anthony Eden in him, and not just European Stadlonim. If only he weren't fighting so hard against the image of the Eastern European Jew. Perhaps a noble gesture might have been made by Begin. He might have taken a leaf out of Sadat's copybook and said, I am coming to America to discuss with the president the terms of what he has written. I don't agree with them all, but he has made an offer. I saw that speech. That was a generous offer. It was one of Reagan's finest moments, and there aren't many. Let's cherish them. Somebody told me during the summer that Reagan has performed a service for the American public. He has made Carter look good. I mean, this is a joke against me. I didn't vote for, I voted for Carter. I mean, I felt that Carter was a great president, but all right, delete the last few moments. Da'mashe tashiv, and back again to the bottom of page 285. Betza kesef lola kachu. By the time of the 5th chapter of Judges, that notion already was clearly operating on a level of not taking bribe, gain. We don't know when this poem was written. It's highly unlikely whether it was written as an eyewitness account. It may well be. Maybe it was the emotion recollected in tranquility. We don't know. But we can see that already the notion is no looting, no looting. The stars in their courses.
Who is the subject of that sarcasm? Because Kurtz implies that it is the kings.
I would have thought it applies to those who fought against the Canaanites, that it was a war under the auspices of the command of God to conquer Palestine. That is my understanding. He says that the kings. Yes, now that you mention that, I thank you, because in actual fact there's another part of the Bible where we get this notion very strongly stressed as a spiritual fact that one should not loot. And that, of course, is the story of Abraham. When Abraham fought with the 5 kings, Abraham says that he didn't take even a shoelace. Not even a shoelace, not a pin. Nobody should say, Ani ha'asharti et Abraham. Let nobody say, I have made Abraham rich. So this is a tradition in Jewish history which goes back. We can follow it in the book of Judges right to its primitive origins. This would not be a surprise, by the way. Many of the most spiritual, ethical values in Jewish tradition are grounded in primitive taboos. Some scholars say that even the Shabbat was originally a taboo day, and there may be a small element of truth in that. What we see is the evolution, the growth. There is progress. Rudolf Otto, the famous German theologian, once said cynically, because he did not believe there was progress in religion, that human beings evolve and progress the way milk evolves into sour milk. The stars in their courses. Why does that strike a chord? Was there a book or a movie called The Stars in Their Courses? Was it a novel? Everybody knows that phrase. It's part of the, what is it, the stars in their courses? Wasn't there a book or a novel on that text? My heavens above, I don't have Hebraeus, I don't have gynecologists, we have no literary experts here this morning. What's going on? Does anybody know this phrase? Have you ever heard the phrase, the stars in their courses? Shakespeare used it? I must look it up. The stars in their courses fall from heaven. The brook Kishon swept them away, the ancient brook, the brook Kishon. Oh, my soul, tread them down with strength. Then did the horse hoofs stamp by reason of the prancings of their mighty ones. Curse ye Meroz, said the angel of the Lord. Curse ye bitterly the inhabitants thereof, because they came not to the help of the Lord amongst the mighty. Let me go to the Hebrew now for the next verse. Tovorach minashim Yael Eshet Chever Hakini Minashim Ba'ohel Tovorach. Blessed above women shall Yael be, the wife of Chever the Canaanite. Above women in the tent shall she be blessed. And one more verse in Hebrew. Mayim, look at the beautiful economy of the Hebrew language. What a beautiful language this is. Mayim sha'al chalav natana besefel adirim hikriva chema. Water he asked, milk she gave him. On a lordly bowl she brought him curd. Next literary question for this morning. There is a novel that was published within the last 30 years, I am sure, called A Lordly Bowl. Can't I get some help from somebody this morning? Yes, the Bible has been used for titles from many, many years. The little foxes, nobody knows a lordly bowl. Maybe it wasn't published in America. Okay, we better put our socks up. It's Rosh Hashanah next week. I can see the summer has led to a great deal of rustiness. We need to do some spiritual jogging around the spiritual reservoir. On a lordly bowl, that's a marvelous Sefer Adirim, on a lordly bowl. Her hand she put to the tent pin, her right hand to the workman's hammer. And with the hammer she smote Sisera. She smote through his head. Yea, she pierced and struck through his temples. At her feet he sunk, he fell, he lay. At her feet he sunk, he fell. Where he sunk, there he fell down dead. We pause. You can imagine what our rabbis made of that verse. I'll give you one guess. What went on in the tent between Yael and Sisera? Any of us? Thank God, at least we haven't lost our... thank heavens above, at least that area still remains unsullied by the summer months. Okay. Yes, the rabbis say that she induced him to have sexual intercourse with her 7 times. You all better go and see Shika. Induced her to have 7 times so that she would tie him out. I didn't think she'd have the strength to pick up the hammer. I'm very impressed. I am enormously impressed that Deborah was able to knock a hammer through a man's head 7 times. The reason, of course, as you can see, Bein Ragleha, there are 7 verbs. Kara, nafal, shachav, kara, nafal, kara, nafal. That's supposed to add up to 7, right? So each of those verbs refer to an act of sexual intercourse. And on this verse, the rabbis in 3 different tractates of the Talmud built up a most beautiful discussion which I want to share with you very briefly this morning. It's a Talmudic argument with all the trammels of the halakhic methodology, but on a midrashic theme. The discussion revolves around the statement of a rabbi called Nachman bar Yitzchak, whose date escapes me, a 2nd or 3rd post-Christian century Amora. And his statement around which the discussion revolves is Gedola aveira lishma mi mitzvah shelo lishma. A sin that is done with good motivations, a bona fide sin. Aveira, by the way, very often, most often I suspect, has a sexual connotation. If you look up Jastro's dictionary, you will see that aveira invariably means some sexual misdemeanor. Gedola aveira lishma, a sexual misdemeanor which is performed bona fides. Don't get any fancy ideas. Lishma is a very difficult concept. Before you decide to act out before Rosh Hashanah, come and have a pastoral conversation with me and discuss it. It's a very difficult. Gedola aveira lishma, a sexual misdemeanor which is done with noble motivations, bona fides, is on a higher spiritual level than a mitzvah that is performed without bona fide motivation. You understand why I'm proud to be part of this tradition? This is an incredible statement. Long before Freud ever began to think about the punitive superego, the rabbis intuited that you can have a frummie who does everything according to the book and is treif through and through, because it's done without the authentic motivation. And there are people who do things, if we extend metaphorically the meaning of Avera, which ostensibly and manifestly are a violation of the law, and yet they are done for a certain higher purpose. Now this leads to another comment, which is also a well-known pitgam. This is a statement by Rabbi Yehuda in the name of Rav, Abba Arika, a famous 2nd century, post-Christian century scholar. Le'olam ya'asok adam b'torah u'b'mitzvot, afilu shelo lishman, shemitoch shelo lishman, ba lishman. A man should always occupy himself in performing mitzvot. You all know the word mitzvot, right? Do I have to translate it? A mitzvah means a good deed. It can mean narrowly one of the commandments, like eating kosher, like observing the Shabbat, going to synagogue, studying the Torah, or it can mean helping a lame blind people across the street, or giving tzedakah. Mitzvah is a good deed. A man should occupy himself with Torah and mitzvot, even from bad motivations. gives charity or gives a large sum of money to a charity because he wants people to think that he's a great philanthropist, wants to get the kudos, wants to serve on a committee or become chairman or whatever because of the kudos. Don't worry, there's no kudos being chairman in this place. I mean, I'm talking about where places where being a chairman is kudos, you know. What was that joke about the man who was looking for the chairman of the synagogue and he was looking around and he said to somebody, "Do you know where the chairman lives?" What do you mean, the chairman of the synagogue? That no good. Yeah, he lives 4 blocks down. And the man got lost a little further down. It seemed to be wrong. And he's met somebody else. He says, "You know where the chairman of the synagogue lives?" "Where the chairman of the synagogue lives? You mean that horrible person? I don't even want to talk about him. He lives down there." And this man kept on asking people where the chairman of the synagogue lived. And each time there was more vituperation, more horrible epithets hurled out, more abuse. And finally he gets to the house of the chairman of the synagogue and he says, "I don't understand." He said, "Why are you the chairman of the synagogue?" And the man said, "For the yichus." For those who don't know Hebrew and Yiddish, in other words, for the kudos. So, a man should perform good deeds even and study the Torah, come to synagogue, keep a kosher home, support UGA Federation, buy bonds, even if it's done for the most nefarious reasons. Oscar Wilde once said, "Hypocrisy is the tribute which vice pays to virtue." I've heard Jews very superior saying, "I don't give this person, he gives a lot of money, but he does this, that, and the other, therefore his money is worthless." Believe me, it's not worthless at all. We'll worry about the man's moral posture later. Let's take the money and deal with the other questions later on. And why should a man perform mitzvot and study Torah shelo lishma? Because if a man gets into the habit of doing good deeds, after a while he likes doing it for their own sake. And he'll do that lishma. The word lishma comes from the Hebrew word shem. Literally it means for its own name. It means, I suppose the best way of doing it, if you do something for mixed motives or bad motives or impure motives, ultimately you will do it for pure motives, good motives. Could anybody speak English in the congregation? Could help me to give a better translation? Mitoch shelo lishma ba lishma? Shall?
Translated as for its proper purpose. Just as Torah lishma is Torah not for its own sake, which is a ridiculous concept, but Torah for its proper intended purpose.
Yes, except that I think the concept of motivation can't be removed completely because in study of Torah, for example, the goal is to study Torah not because people will say you are a great scholar, not because people will praise you, not because you'll get paid for it, but purely for the love of doing it. There must be a better English way of translating this. Go ahead. For the purpose of. Yes. Okay, fine, I'll settle for that. Now, we have a problem here because it says in the 5th chapter of the book of Judges, "Blessed be Yael, the wife of Heber the Canaanite, may she be blessed above women in the tent." Let me just explain this. There's a problem here. The argument here is this. On the one hand, it says a sin which is done with the right motive is better than a mitzvah done for the wrong motive or for the wrong purpose. But the statement which says a man should perform mitzvot even without having the right purpose because it ultimately leads him to do things for a good purpose, it's a contradiction. How can you say, the rabbis say, how can you say that an Aveirah performed for a good motive is better? Surely it can't be better, because the other statement says that if you perform mitzvot without motivations, ultimately you get performing. Do you see what I'm saying? This is the Talmudic way of thinking. How can you say the performance of the Aveirah with a bad motivation is better than performing a mitzvah with a bad motivation? Let's start that again. How can you say that performing an Aveirah with a good motivation is better than performing a mitzvah with a bad motivation if another statement tells us that performing a mitzvah with a bad motivation ultimately leads to performing a mitzvah with good motivation? And so the resolution of this problem is, don't say it's better, say it is as good as. Performing a sin with a bad motive is as good as performing a mitzvah with a bad motive, because if you perform a mitzvah with a bad motive long enough, ultimately you perform the mitzvah. You don't have a Talmudic mind. I've got to work on you. What? Come on.
No, that's not necessarily though. Are they assuming that, or are they saying maybe that will happen?
They're assuming on the basis of their knowledge of human beings that if you put a man into a context in which he is surrounded by people who have good intentions, and he is doing what he's doing with bad intentions, ultimately the human nature within him will watch what the other people are doing, and if they are doing it authentically, then he or she will not fail to be impressed, and ultimately, you may not agree with that psychology of life. I happen to agree with it, except when you're dealing with psychopaths. I think when you're dealing with the average run-of-the-mill human beings, I've seen time and again people who became involved for the most mixed of motives, ultimately were very impressed by other people doing things. I've experienced it myself, time and again, where I have been involved with a certain enterprise with the most mixed of motives. I've been enormously impressed at the quality of some of the other people who are engaged in that enterprise, and ultimately I've been able to change my own motivations. I think all of us can think of examples where this has happened. Now, the interesting thing is that here the rabbis want to know why Yael is given such a mishaberach, tvorach minashim Yael, minashim ba'ohel tvorach. That phrase is still used of Jewish women today, minashim ba'ohel tvorach. And they find some meaning in the word ohel. What does the word ohel refer to? Why is Yael, the wife of Hever the Canaanite, blessed above all women in the tent? See, the reason they have to find an explanation for this sentence is that until a few moments ago, this sentence was proof for the fact that a sin committed with a good motivation was better than a mitzvah performed with a bad motivation. But now we have lost the reason for using this sentence in this way, because now we have come to the conclusion that a sin performed with a good motivation is not better than, but as good as. So what are we going to do with this verse now? If it doesn't come to us as a proof text for the fact that an Aveirah performed with a good motive is better than, what can we do with this text? We have to explain why Yael is so much to be praised. If it cannot be used as a proof text, it has to have some meaning, because everything has meaning. And the answer is that Yael is better than. The meaning now is not an anagogic meaning, it's not a deferred or metaphorical meaning, it is a literal original meaning. She is superior, is Yael, to the other women in the tent. Who are the other women in the tent? Who are the other women of whom it is said in the Bible, Vayiviyeha ha'ohela? He brought her to the tent. Of whom it is said, exactly, and of Sarah it is said, V'hisho ma'at petach ha'ohel v'hu acharav. In the case of Sarah, she was listening in the tent while the angel was speaking of the birth of Isaac. Of Rivka, it was said that Isaac brought her to the tent of Rebekah, her wife. And there's also a verse which shows that Sarah and Leah also were associated with the word ohel. Why was Yael better than the other women? They were matriarchs. Sarah, Rivka, Rachel, Leah. This woman whose sole claim to fame was that she had the strength after 7 acts of sexual intercourse to drive a nail through the head of a Canaanite commander-in-chief. Why is she elevated above the women in the tent? The commentary says that the other women used the tent nefariously, that the matriarchs were very querulous. They were rivalrous with each other. They gave their husbands, when their husbands could not produce children from them, to their concubines because they were embarrassed at the competition. If they couldn't have children, they had to have children. It seems to me that in the tent of the SAJ, there's some such rivalry going, because every time I look around, some other woman gets pregnant. We better call this Ohel Kaplan. I think we have a new designation for our synagogue here, with all our pregnancies running around. It gets better as the years go on. Now, what is it then happened? That the matriarchs used sexual intercourse in the interests of competition and rivalry. But Yael used sexual intercourse for the sake of the kingdom of heaven. Selma, you don't believe it, and I don't believe you. It's very hard. You don't believe it. What?
I don't like it.
You don't like it. I know. What can I do? So, in other words, Yael did it for the sake of God. She knew that the odds were, as soon as she picked up a hammer, Sisera would wake up. And as a woman, she realized, in spite of whatever will happen as a result of the fireman's test today, that she wasn't as physically strong as this warrior. And therefore, she wanted to, as we say in Greek, famata him before the... Yes, Warren?
Sure. Where does that put Delilah? And where does that put
of these priestesses are the Philistine and Moloch and everything else, and their sexual
it's a good question, but let me put it on the back burner for the time being, Warren, because we have other gefilte fish to fry this morning. I would like to mention, this is the rabbis are trying to make something out of this text, you see. Yael, they say, was superior because she used it for a spiritual purpose. And even though she wasn't married to this man, and even though she wasn't his concubine, so in a sense, there was a quality of immorality from the biblical perception, nevertheless, she did it in order that she might deliver Israel from the hands of the enemy. This is a beautiful little bit of argumentation discussion. If you don't like the Talmudic argument, of course, you're not going to like it. I find it fascinating the way they show that Yael committed this sin, in quotation marks, and it was attributed to her as a double blessing, whereas the matriarchs who were legally married to their patriarch husbands were involved in rivalry. And of course, as you know, rivalry was regarded as the great besetting sin in Jewish tradition. The rabbis in the Talmud say, why was the temple destroyed the second time? The Jews weren't worshipping idols. The Jews stopped worshipping idols after the destruction of the first temple. The first temple was destroyed because of idolatry. But at the time of the second temple, the Jews weren't worshipping idols anymore. Why was the second temple destroyed? Sinat chinam, causeless hatred, rivalry, jealousy, interpersonal ambition. That is what caused the destruction of the second temple. And they tell the story of Kamsa bar Kamsa, but we can't tell that story now. This is from the Talmud. I just want to give you one brief quotation from Rashi. Rashi on verse, Rashi on the verse I haven't got to yet, so the next verse. So I'll read the next verse and then I'll give you Rashi on it. Let's go to the next verse in the Bible, verse 28. I'm going to read it in Hebrew and English. Bi'ad hachalon nishkefa vatiyabev aim Sisra bi'ad ha'ishnav. Through the window she looked forth and peered, the mother of Sisra, through the lattice. Whoever this ancient poet was, he was a genius. He is able to move with an alacrity worthy of a Homer from this incredible scene in the tent. Yael with a bloody hammer and pin, Sisera dead, to the tent of Sisera, the dead man's mother. Immediate switch. One can almost see it cinematographically. An immediate, brilliant stroke of poetic genius. Through the window, the mother of Sisera looked forth and peered through the lattice. Why is his chariot so long in coming? Why tarry the wheels of his chariot? Madua boshesh rikhbolabo. Madua echeru pa'amei makvotav. The wisest of her princesses answer, yea, she returned to answer to herself. Are they not dividing the spoil? She doesn't know at that moment that her son lies dead. They are dividing the spoil, she reassures herself. A damsel, two damsels to every man. The English translation does not give credit to the vulgarity of the Hebrew. Racham rachamatayim lerosh gever. I won't translate here. Some of you still are offended by my language. I would dearly like to do it, but I know that Rosh Hashanah is next week, and we have enough trouble at the board meeting on Wednesday without having the rabbi held up for using four-letter Anglo-Saxon words. Let me leave it to your imagination. Racham is the dirtiest word you can think of for a woman. It personifies the woman by her sexual capacity. Actually, rechem, of course, means womb. I leave it to your imagination. And gever, rosh gever, is the equivalent for a man. This is the greatness of our ancestors, that they didn't have our hang-ups on these matters. A damsel, two damsels to every man. You see what it does here, by translating it literally, you see, you have the verse where Sisera's mother is looking out of the window like a mother waiting for her son to return. Everybody is somebody's bubbler. Everybody is somebody's bubbler. She changed his diapers once. She nursed him at her breast. She burped him. She wiped his tushy. This woman is waiting at the window, and she moves from being a mother in Israel to this vulgarity of the conqueror, the conquering Canaanite, They're all dead, she thinks. My son did it. And now they're sharing those women out. 1, 2 to a man. To Sisera, a spoil of dyed garments. Dye was very precious in those days, like platinum. A special sea urchin called murex was used, from which the purple came. A spoil of dyed garments of embroidery, 2 dyed garments embroidered for the neck of every spoiler. And finally, Kain Yovdu Kol Oivech Adonai. The poet finally lets his triumphalism get the better of him. So perish all thine enemies, O Lord. But they that love him be as the sun when he goeth forth in his might, and the land had rest for 40 years. This is the verse, by the way, that Menachem Begin quoted only a few weeks ago after the Beirut episode was finished, that the land would have rest for 40 years. Let me turn briefly to Rashi on the verse Vatyabev, verse 28. Through the window, Sisera's mother looked, and what is the English translation? Vatyabev, Biyad ha'eshnav, Biyad ha'chalon nishkeva, Vatyabev, nishkeva. Through the window she looked forth and peered. So, Vatyabev, it's a curious verb in Hebrew. Vatyabev is translated on very good syntactic grounds as look, because in Hebrew poetry we have a phenomenon called parallelism, where the same idea is repeated in different language. So nishkefa, hashkifa, lahashkif, to look, and vatyabev could quite easily, on syntactical grounds alone, be interpreted as look. But the word yevava in Aramaic means something else completely. And Rashi says vatyabev, first of all he says lashon dibur. It means speech. Eliezer? Yevava in modern Hebrew. In modern Hebrew. In modern Hebrew, Eliezer, I insist, a silent cry. What is a silent cry? Well, if it's a silent cry, who hears it? You mean a little cry? A little cry, or a little cry, in modern Hebrew. Now, Rashi says it comes from the verse, Borei niv sfatayim. This is a verse from the book of Isaiah. God says, I create the fruit of the lips. So the fruit of the lips is a metaphor for speech. So that's one possibility. V'rabotenu pershuhu, Rashi says, but our rabbis have explained it, Lashon genicha, groaning, kitzruah, like the sound of the shofar. Da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da. That's a yevava. And as a matter of fact, if you read the Mishnah on Rosh Hashanah, which deals with the blowing of the shofar, you will see that the third note, the first note is tekiah, teruah is, tekiah, shivarim is 3 notes, and teruah is 9 broken notes. They are referred to in Aramaic as yevava. And Rashi then goes on to point out that in Aramaic, the Aramaic translation of the word teruah, which is the sound of a horn, of a shofar, of a trumpet, is yevava, with an aleph. Va'ani omer, Rashi says, but I say, lashon ra'aya. It means looking. And in fact, Rashi's view was followed by the translators of the translation that I have. I don't have the most recent translation of the Hebrew Bible in front of me. And the verse that he uses is a phrase which is used in Hebrew, the apple of your eye, babat ayin, the apple of your eye. Babat ayin, the apple of your eye. And he says, Menachem, who was a very famous medieval commentator, comes to the same conclusion, and a grammarian. Now, we have to conclude very shortly. And I only wish to draw one modest conclusion from our study this morning. I am indebted to Trudy Weiss-Rosmarin, the editor of the Jewish Spectator, for a very moving editorial in the current issue of the Jewish Spectator, which she entitles No Peace in Galilee. She does not ignore in that article any of the painful realities of the situation. That the PLO are and were murderers of innocent civilians, that they were brigands, that they were immoral, that they were thieves, that they stole, that they took over a state which was not their own, and indulged in all kinds of chicanery and deception and swindling in order to impose their vile will on the innocent citizens of Lebanon. There is no denying that reality. Nor can there be any denying of the reality that Israel had no alternative but on some level to deal militarily with a threat that was constantly posed by the proximity of the shells and the bullets of these brigands and the men, women, and children who tried to eke out a decent life in the north of Galilee in Israel. Every decent, civilized human being agonized over the fact that innocent civilians were killed. Although world press and world public opinion and American and French and British public opinion will one day soon have to answer for the fact that the facts were distorted beyond any reasonable recognition. We Jews should learn from that something is not well in the state of Denmark. That when we ourselves react on a personal level, when we hear that somebody that we don't like has done something wrong, we jump to certain conclusions, like when a page in Washington declares that certain senators have involved themselves in sexual practices. How many people immediately rush to the conclusion and said, you see what's going on? It's not bad enough they do this, that, and the other? Before people have been given a decent, fair trial. Before the slanderer has been put up in front of people who can question and find out what exactly did happen. We must note, and Bayard Rustin's letter in the New York Times yesterday was greatly appreciated by all of us. The distortion was almost as if world public opinion needed to see the Jews as Nazis. The word genocide was used in Paris. All this is true. But, Trudy Rice-Roseman goes on, I also know that in the pursuit of military aims, all armies disregard civilians. Children, women, and unarmed men in their paths. The first obligation of the military command is to minimize losses of its own fighting forces. You win wars by terrorizing enemy cities far from the battlefield. America justified, and its military experts continue to justify, the dropping of the atom bomb on Hiroshima and Nagasaki because this brutality was merciful. It ended the war and thus saved more lives, certainly more American lives, than was sacrificed. It makes military strategic sense that Israel bombed PLO installations located in heavy concentrations of civilian populations, including Beirut. But together with large numbers of Israel and Jews the world over, I sorrow for and agonize over the thousands of Lebanese civilians who died, were wounded, and made homeless by the War for Peace for Galilee. And we include, of course, the Israeli soldiers who were wounded. One of the most beautiful things we learned during the summer, my wife and I, that our son Jonathan, who is not yet a resident in Israel, although he intends to stay there permanently, played music. He's made music and music therapy his métier there, played music to the wounded soldiers who were brought back from Lebanon. It was a sense of proximity to what was going on there, far more powerful than all the propaganda that one could read in the world. And yet, I am horrified at the attitude of the Israeli government this week, as in defiance of a clear, unequivocal American request for cooperation, they defy President Reagan. And we should know by now that without America's continued fiscal and military help, Israel will be crushed like a rotten egg within the next 5 years. Let's have no doubts about that. It's chutzpah of a quintessential order. It seems to me when we Jews didn't have governments and politicians and elections, we spent our time polishing our concept of chutzpah. For all that America has done and given the Jewish people in the last 40-odd years of Israel's existence, President Reagan deserved a better answer than the one that Begin and his government gave him. And it's time that Jews in America stood up and were counted, making precisely that statement. Thank God B'nai B'rith finally came out of its hole in the wall. Not until a certain Mr. Dine, may his name be for a blessing, decided to break the ice. And yet, in certain Jewish circles, to a greater extent than I would care, there is a vulgar Jewish triumphalism, as if we Jews, after 2,000 years of being homeless, cannot truly appreciate the needs of the Palestinians. The Palestinians are homeless, they have a land, they deserve a land, and whether we Jews like it or not, I will tell you, with all the strength I can muster, they are going to get a land, some part of their ancestral homeland. They are going to get. They are going to get it either with the cooperation of the Jewish people or against the cooperation of the Jewish people. When Golda Meir in 1967 was saying, "Who are the Palestinians?" I warned this congregation that one day the Arabs would learn to shoot straight. Mark my words, anybody can handle guns. Let's not think that only Jews know how to handle guns. And the greatness of this editorial was that it linked what was going on in Israel with the 5th chapter of the book of Judges. And as one of my New Year resolutions, I will write a letter to Trudy Weiss-Rosemary, my distinguished colleague and friend, and tell her that of all the stuff I read during the summer, all the propaganda handouts, all the propaganda, all the lobbyists, all the rabbis, high holiday sermons in synopsis, all the editorials that I saw in Jewish and non-Jewish magazines, none of them came anywhere near to that moment when my heart was pierced as with a sword. When Trudy Weiss-Rosemary quoted that verse, she says, in trying to analyze my no-yes attitude to Israel's bombing of PLO installations in civilian population centers, I was reminded of Deborah's song in the 5th chapter of the book of Judges. The song celebrates the victory over Sisera and his army, described in detail in Judges chapter 4. The song pays special tribute to Yael, who when Sisera, seeking refuge in her tent, gave him milk instead of water for which he asked, and then, as he was sleeping, took a tent pin and a hammer in her hand and approached him quietly and smote the pin in his temples. The song celebrates Yael, bestows upon her the tribute which is still traditionally tendered to meritorious Jewish women. Most blessed of women in the tent shall she be. Minashim ba'ohel tevorach. But while celebrating Israel's victory, the Song of Deborah is also mindful of the anxiety and worry of Sisera's mother. She stands by the window, anxiously peering out, and asks, "Why is his chariot so late in coming? Why do the wheels of his chariot tarry?" The author of this song concludes his celebration of the victory with a curse, "So may perish all your enemies, O Lord." That is, the enemies of the children of Israel. But he also, this poet, is mindful of the sorrow of the slain enemy's mother, who waits for her son, who will never return. A colleague of mine just returned recently from a tour of South America. I mean, not South America, I mean below the Mason-Dixon line. I was impressed by the artifacts, mounds, archaeological evidence of the richness of the Amerindian civilization which preceded our American civilization. How could we have wiped out those Indians, he said to me. The civilization which produced those mounds was sophisticated. It was different from ours, but they had their sacred texts, they had their myths, they had their gods, they had their religions. They were decent human beings. The fact is that the book of Joshua is the book of the Jewish manifest destiny. What Begin is perpetrating right now is a crime in the name of myth. The myth that Judea and Samaria are ours in the same primordial, primitive, barbaric claim has governed the manifest destiny of the book of Joshua. That is not the claim for a Jewish state in Israel. The claim for a Jewish state in Israel today must be on liberal, democratic grounds, not because thousands of years ago the God that we believed in told us to wipe out, a la Hitler, the 7 indigenous nations. Judea and Samaria is Nazi talk. It's not Jewish talk. It's Herrenvolk talk. It is not Jewish talk. It is fascist talk. It is not Jewish talk. And this has to be said loud and clear. And if I catch any one of you in synagogue this morning turning sour because I repeat anything of what I said this morning over Rosh Hashanah, then don't stay in for the sermon. These kinds of ideas don't grow on trees. Call this a dry run. I would have to make my Rosh Hashanah sermon a little shorter. Call this a dry run. Manifest destiny made it possible for America to wipe out the American Indians the way Hitler tried to wipe out the Jews like cockroaches, because once you determine that the people you are fighting are subhuman, you have a secondary gain. You wipe them out. That is the myth. The Palestinians are not subhuman, even though most members of the PLO have acted like animals. The Palestinians are not Amerindians. Well, you might say somewhat cynically, forget all this spiritual nonsense, Rabbi Miller. After all said and done, America is America and the Indians are dead. We play cowboys and Indians, but that's it, the way I used to play Jews and Arabs as a child in Habonim, the Zionist youth organization. Well, let me just add, in case the spiritual argument isn't convincing, and I never feel too sure when I make a spiritual claim these days, let me add and conclude with a very pragmatic claim. If the United States of America was as big as Illinois, and there were 5 million Amerindians with oil and other raw materials surrounding them on all sides, I don't think the Indian solution would have ended as simply as it does now, with the Indians packed away on a few reservations. The fact of the matter is that Israel cannot survive without peace. It is not a question of who will win and who will not win. We are surrounded by 150 million Arabs who will simply not sleep until their face has been saved. And all you have to know is just one chapter of Arab history to know that face saving means more to Arabs than to any other group in the world. We better get our act together. We may not pay the price, but our grandchildren may. Well, let's go back to Isaiah. This is the very, very end. Don't worry, it's 12:05 and you're going to get out early anyway. You wouldn't want to have the kiddush before you'd worked up a nice appetite. Just a few verses from the book of Isaiah, page 884. Page 884. For Zion's sake will I not hold my peace. For Jerusalem's sake will I not rest, until her triumph go forth as brightness, and her salvation as a torch that burneth. And the nations shall see thy triumph, and all kings thy glory, and thou shalt be called by a new name, which the mouth of the Lord shall mark out. Thou shalt be a crown of beauty in the hand of the Lord, and a royal diadem in the open hand of thy God. Thou shalt no more be termed forsaken, neither shall thy land any more be termed desolate. Thou shalt be called, my delight is in her, and thy land espoused. For the Lord delighteth in thee, and thy land shall be espoused. I have set watchmen upon thy walls, O Jerusalem. They shall never hold their peace day or night. Ye that are the Lord's remembrances, take ye no rest, and give him no rest, till he establish and till he make Jerusalem a praise in the earth. That is our hope and prayer as we commence our new year here, and as we approach Rosh Hashanah. Let Jerusalem become a praise in the earth. We rise for Aleinu, page 194.